Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm really pleased to be back with my old friend, Philip Margolin. And I say old friend because he's almost as old as I am, not quite. Um, and I have to say that showing that there's a new book by Annie Lamott in which she writes that she signed up for Medicare the day or right before she got married for the first time. As she said, you're never too old for this. So Phil is very happily remarried. His first wife passed away, and he's married to a very adventurous lady, and they're doing a lot of traveling. So whenever I talk to him, I never know where he's been. It's amazing. Anyway, Phil's friend, Dan Bronson, is here with us this evening, and we're going to talk to him about a wonderful Hollywood noir set in 1947. But let's start talking to Phil. Now, I will say by way of introduction, a fact I didn't know is that Phil was in the Peace Corps in Liberia. Wow, long time ago. You were one of the early Peace Corps guys.
I was Peace Corps 3. I think it was the second or third year that the corps around, and it was really an amazing, eye-opening experience for someone in his early 20s. So got a chance to travel all over the world, in West Africa and through the Middle East, and better education in 4 years of college, I can say.
So your current travels with your wife, Melanie, are actually no big thing for you. It's just a continuation.
Yeah, I think I'm up to like over 70 countries now, and we're actually going to go back. I've been in Jordan and Egypt in the 60s, and we're going to go back in about a month or so, and I'm just dying to see the changes. I'm sure it's totally different from when I was there the first time.
Well, I'm not so sure. I was in Egypt a year ago, December, and it didn't seem very different than my first visit. And when you're in Jordan, be sure to go to Jerash, which I think is the best Roman city. I absolutely was blown away by Jerash, which I'd never heard of until I got to Jordan.
Yeah, I was there in like 1966, 67, and just thought the whole experience in the Middle East was fantastic. So I'm, like I said, it, it's been around for thousands of years, so it might not have changed that much.
Probably not. So Phil wrote his first novel in 1978 when he was already practicing criminal defense lawyering in Portland, Oregon. And you said, Phil, remind me, haven't you said virtually all of your books, or maybe all of your books indeed, in Portland or in Oregon?
Yeah, I think I have one book, Sleight of Hand, which is set in Washington D.C. and Seattle and Vancouver, BC. But other than that, they're all either completely or partially in Oregon.
So the Pacific Northwest is what you know. And
yeah, I moved out in 1970, right after law school at NYU. I grew up in New York City and Long Island, but wanted to get the hell out as quick as I could. So right after I graduated from law school, I moved to Oregon to clerk at for the chief judge of the Oregon Court of Appeals, and fell in love with the place. I'd never been. I had to look on a map to see where it was. It was really weird. And got the job, went out there, and just fell in love with the place. And I've been there ever since.
And that happens to a lot of us. My husband grew up on Park Avenue, and then he went to Santa Fe and never left the Southwest. I grew up in Winnetka, north of Chicago, and I've been here since 1986. So there's a lure of the West. Maybe who was it? The newspaper guy, Go West.
Young man, go west.
Yeah. Who was that, Dan? Do you remember? Horace Greeley? Was it Horace Greeley?
Yes, it was Horace Greeley.
I think it was Horace Greeley. Oh, see, it takes longer for the retrieval system to work, but you guys both know that. So, Phil, your new book, in the fourth for Robin Lockwood, is called The Perfect Alibi. No, that was the book before. I'm sorry. Caught myself in time. So, tell us about the new book, Phil.
Yeah, one of the most challenging things I did during my 25 years as a criminal defense lawyer was death penalty murder cases. And it's a lot of pressure, and any other case, if you lose it, at least your client's alive. But if you lose a death case, they eat your client. So you literally have to cross every T and dot every I. You have to be perfect, and of course, no human is. And so there's a lot of pressure on. And so, as a background for the book, I show how you do a death penalty murder case, which is different from every other kind of criminal case, and including non-death murder cases. But that's just sort of the backdrop. In this book, Joe Lattimore is a homeless man. He's was a short order cook. He and professional boxer, but not a very good boxer. And he loses his job, and he's madly in love with his wife and child, but they're homeless. They've been living in a tent city, and he's lured into fighting in a no holds barred illegal fight because he's offered $300, which is enough to get his wife and child out of into a motel. And during the fight, he kills his opponent and is blackmailed by the people running this illegal fight into burglarizing a house. So when he goes into the house thinking he's just going to be going in and getting something out of a safe, it's in a very wealthy area of Portland. He comes into the house and finds a dead body, and it's the body of the wife of Judge Anthony Carrasco, a really slimy judge, and his fingerprints are on the wall. He runs out, and the judge and a deputy DA just happen to drive up at the same time and can identify him. So it looks like an open and shut death penalty case for the district attorney's office. And Robin agrees to represent him on a court-appointed basis and begins to smell a rat, and is facing incredible odds in trying to save this guy from death row. So that's the background. And as I said, while I'm having sex and violence and all the other good stuff and twists and turns that make up a good legal thriller, I'm also showing, without beating anyone over the head, how you do a death case from beginning to end.
So Dan, why don't you quiz Phil a little bit on this, because you've recently read his book.
All right. Well, it's a terrific read. And it offers a very thoughtful perspective on the question of the death penalty, even as it keeps those pages turning. One of the things that I find really interesting about Phil's work is I think of him as a grand puzzle master. He makes this big picture, and then he cuts it up in all these little irregular pieces. He jumbles them, and he feeds them to the reader one at a time. And you think, well, what's this character got to do with that character? What's this storyline got to do with that storyline? And then at the end, he brings it all together in a very complete picture. I don't know if that's the way you work, Phil, but it certainly reads that way. And that was true even of Last Innocent Man. We're following David Nash, and all of a sudden here comes this character named Ortiz, and well, what's he got to do with that? Anyhow, it creates a really interesting kind of suspense that you don't see in a lot of other novels. And he's also, well, when I first met him, he invited me over to the house, and what's he got? He's got a table with a chess game in progress, only his opponent isn't present. He's obsessed with chess, and as a matter of fact, I worked that into the screenplay of Last Innocent Man. We've got David Nash and the ultimate villain, John Galt, playing a game of chess, and checkmate, old buddy. Anyhow, I conceive the whole screenplay as a game of chess, because I see Phil doing that in his work again and again. He's manipulating the reader into this sense of complacency, and you can almost, I could hear myself, well, I know who the killer is, and then gotcha, checkmate. We're all pawns. The readers are all pawns that Phil is having a wonderful time manipulating. Is that a fair description of what you do, Phil?
Yeah, I always I grew up with Ellery Queen, and he's one of my favorite all time. As a matter of fact, he was my inspiration for writing mysteries with clues. And Ellery Queen was probably the greatest American mystery writer in the 30s and 40s. And he's one of the few few mystery writers who actually put clues in the book. And if you solve them, if you can figure out the clues, it's not easy. You can figure out who the killer is. And he would have a blank page at the about 9/10 the way through, and it would say, "Challenge to the reader. You now have all the clues that you need to figure out who killed Mr. Jones. Can you do it?" And it was pretty fair with 99% of the books. So that inspired me to try to put clues in. I don't always do it, but I try to do it now. And I did it with A Matter of Life and Death. You can, if you catch there's one clue, and if you catch the clue, you can figure out who the killer is. And I was really happy about trying to figure out how to do that. But I want to talk a little bit about Dan's book. And Dan is an exceptionally good writer. And I love the cover, by the way. I think the cover is really cool for a Humphrey Bogart, Sam Spade, Philip Marlowe type tough guy detective story. And I just want to tell this little story, give you some idea how good a writer is. I met Dan back in 1985 when he and Donna Dubrow optioned my second book, The Last Innocent Man, to make it into a movie. And they didn't have a lot of money. They offered $2,500 for an option, and I was making my living as a lawyer then, so this was just sort of funny money. It was a little extra stuff. And Dan wrote this terrific screenplay, and he came up to Portland to walk around Portland. He lived in California, and we walked around. And so then he wrote the screenplay, and it was really exceptionally good. Well, a year ran out, and I don't know if he knows this or not, but if he doesn't, he'll be learning for the first time. A year ran out, the option ran out, and Dan and Donna didn't have a lot of money, and they asked for a free option year, which is sort of unusual. Well, at the same time they did that, another person wanted to option the book for $10,000. So I asked my agent, what should I do? And he said, "Phil, go with Dan and Donna, because if this movie is going to be made, it'll be made because of Dan's screenplay." And sure enough, within a short time, HBO bought the rights, made the movie. It was an exceptionally good movie. Back in the 80s, 87 is when it came out. The Emmys didn't recognize cable, but there were ACE Awards that were for cable TV. And Last Innocent Man, I think, was nominated for 6 Best Actor, Best Movie, and one of the things was Best Screenplay. And even though Dan didn't win it, it was some real recognition for just how good a job he did. And I think this carries over to Someone to Watch Over Me, which I really like. I like, Maltese Falcon is one of my favorite all-time movies, and I love the book too. And this fits right in with that genre. So for a first novel, it's a terrific effort.
It is very good. And we'll talk about it in a second. I did want to mention, when I held up the book, that we will order this book on demand for you at the Poison Pen. And I don't have a copy of Phil's book to show you because they are in transit from Phil's very office to the Poison Pen, but they'll probably be in tomorrow. So don't forget to grab your copy. Now, Dan, I want to know why you call yourself a Hollywood nobody. I went to your website and I thought, is that just, a joke, or is it, let me say, I don't want to say fake modesty because that seems unkind, but why is it that you describe yourself as a nobody when you're clearly a somebody?
Well, I was on the verge of superstardom in Hollywood not as an actor, but as a writer, producer, director, more times than you could count. And as a matter of fact, there were 5 times I was about to direct and didn't. There was a time when John McTiernan at the peak of his career, the director of Hunt for Red October, Die Hard, Predator, the Thomas Crown Affair. He had committed to directing a screenplay of mine called Juggernaut, and it had been budgeted and scheduled. The head of production at MGM said it was the best screenplay that he'd ever worked on. This guy had been in the business for 30 years. And at the last minute, Michael Crichton came along and waved this book called Eaters of the Dead in front of John. And he decided to make instead The 13th Warrior. And so that one went away. Anyhow, I never broke through big time. A lot of my friends did. Some of them still are. But in a sense, if you look at the website, I have two websites. One is dan-bronson.com. The other is Hollywood-nobody. And I was a hyphen career. I was a writer-producer. At any rate, I made the website, hollywoodnobody.com, into a parody of Hollywood Ego, so that it isn't bio or it's life of Dan, like life of Christ. And the whole thing is inflated that way. And the book in many ways pokes fun at that whole notion. It's a funny, I hope, insider's guide to surviving in Hollywood. And it is in a way a tribute to all the nameless people who make the movies happen, the ones you never hear about. You hear about Bruce Willis, but you don't hear about, well, that guy who serves the coffee, the craft services guy or woman in the morning, so that's what it came out of. Besides that, I thought it was kind of funny. And that was my objective in the whole book. It really shows how hard it is to make it in the movies. What a tough life it is. I once did an interview for a book called Working in Hollywood, and it was interviews with 55 people in 55 different disciplines making the movie. Everyone from the craft services guy to the head of the studio. And my interview was the first, and they asked me a question that they ended up asking most, and it says, well, how do you become, I was exec story editor at Paramount at the time. How do you become a story editor? And I said, well, you're not going to do it the way I did it. That was too quirky and odd and individual to be believed. But I do know one thing, that you have got to believe that this is what you were born to do, that there's nothing else in life for you, that you've got to be willing to put up with every frustration, every humiliation, every brick wall you encounter until at last you get lucky enough for the luck to strike, if it does. So, and that's really the essence of the book. It's tough, but you're so, matter of fact, my most successful movie of the week was something called Death of a Cheerleader. So successful that it was remade 25 years after its initial airing. At any rate, I was almost co-director of the thing through a series of odd circumstances that could never be repeated. And I was sitting in casting with the director, Billy Graham, William A. Graham, dear old Billy. He made the first movie of the week. He'd made something like 70 of them at this point in time, and a dozen feature films. And he turned to me and he said, "Isn't this fun? Can you believe they pay us to do this?" And this guy was 70 years old. He'd been at it for, I don't know, close to 50 years, and he still felt that way. And that's ultimately the thing. Isn't this fun? Can you believe they pay us to do it? Well, that's kind of the essence of Confessions of a Hollywood Nobody.
Oh, what is your take on Someone to Watch Over Me? It's a great title, by the way, and I'm sure it comes from a song, and you probably didn't pay any royalties, but nonetheless, it's a familiar title.
Well, you can't copyright a title.
No.
So
no, you can lyrics, but not a title. No,
yeah, exactly.
Right.
So I came up with the title about halfway through writing it, and that's exactly, I wanted it to reference the song. It's directly applicable to this story. Maybe for your listeners, your viewers, I could give a quick rundown of the plot. It takes place.
Well, you could, but I'd actually like Phil to
Oh,
tell us why it is that he asked me to include you in tonight's
oh,
program,
sure.
because he's a big proponent of it.
Well, yeah, because I had a chance to read it before for a blurb, and I always feel a little nervous when someone asks me to do that because I hate to disappoint people, and I've actually turned people down, friends, if I didn't think the book was good, and I thought it was terrific. It takes place in the 40s in Hollywood, and Jack Shannon, who is the protagonist, he's a babysitter. His actual title is publicist, but what he basically does for the studio is watch over stars who are troublemakers, drunks, someone who's a leading man who the public loves and comes across on the screen as this lovable guy who's actually a mean and angry drunk. And he's then asked to watch over this very beautiful sex symbol star. And she's very temperamental, doesn't show up on time, has nervous breakdowns on the set, and then can cost the studio a fortune. And so he's supposed to keep tabs on her, and then she disappears. And then she might be kidnapped. And so the book is basically, it's one of these real good tough guy detective stories. The hero actually does get knocked out knocked on the head. I think that's sort of a requirement. Your Sam Spade or Philip Marlowe has to get knocked out at least once during a movie or a book. But it's really got a good twist at the end. And the thing I liked about it the most is its picture of Hollywood in the 40s. Not the glamour side, but the seedy side of Hollywood, the scandals and the backbiting in the studios and the infighting. So you've got this tough guy detective story with a good ending and a lot of suspense, but you also get this picture of Hollywood in the era when the studios were king and the actors were all under contract and basically indentured servants, and all of the goings on behind the scene that the people who went to the movies never knew about.
A lot of it, though, I think, was to maintain the illusion. These are people who are up on a silver screen and therefore become larger than life. I mean, I think Shannon Stevens certainly takes elements of Marilyn Monroe in your creation of her. But, it really made me laugh because I said earlier, I grew up in Winnetka, and a young man named Roy Fitzgerald was my grandmother's mailman on the border between Wilmette and Winnetka. And none of us knew that he would turn into Rock Hudson, but certainly none of us knew that he was gay. And they maintained, all the way through all those Doris Day movies and the whole bit. They kept that illusion that, he was a real, He-Man lover, the whole bit. It was the AIDS campaign that undid their illusion. And I thought, Dan, you did a wonderful job talking about the consequences of celebrity. I mean, all these people go out there and they hope to be Lana Turner, sitting at the drugstore counter or whatever it is, and be discovered. And they can be relentless about it. But are they prepared for the consequences of what happens? And you think about Monroe, you can think about Rita Hayworth, so many, especially women, but also men, that found out that it was really tinsel and it ruined their lives. So I thought that was a big takeaway from your book, was how difficult that is. It's a great title for your guy because, he's a publicist, but he's really basically a babysitter and a fixer.
He is. Well, what you're saying about Hollywood and the stars, I wrote my doctoral dissertation on Scott Fitzgerald, who is a huge hero of mine. And he once wrote a book called The Beautiful and Damned. Not a very good book. Great title, one of his weakest novels. But people almost always misquote the title. They call it The Beautiful and the Damned. No, it's The Beautiful and Damned because in Fitzgerald's mind, the beautiful were the damned. And there is a large element of that in my portrait of Hollywood. It also, I have, here's something I just came across. I've been rereading the works of Ross MacDonald, who's a huge hero of mine. And I came across something in the Doomsters just the other day. It's 3 sentences long. He's describing what is I recognize as Santa Barbara Harbor. I used to keep a boat over in that part of the world. And he says, everything was as pretty as a postcard. The trouble with you, I said to myself, you're always turning over the postcards and reading the messages on the underside, written in invisible ink and blood and tears with a black border around them, with postage due, unsigned or signed with a thumbprint. Well, that's the world of Hollywood. That's the world I know. As a matter of fact, in 3 sentences, he does what takes me 3 pages to do in my first chapter. And I was thrilled in a way to come across that passage because it was just so dead on what I'm trying to do in my own book.
And I did it really brilliantly. Sorry, Phil, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to mention, there were 3 people that consistently wrote mysteries with clues that you can solve, and Ross MacDonald's number 2. And the other one was the early Harlan Coben, Myron Bolitar books. But Ross MacDonald, who I think is phenomenal, and he was the first guy first mystery writer to get reviewed on the front page of the New York Times Book Review. And if you read his books, there are clues in there, and The Chill is one of my all-time favorites, but there are clues in there, and if you pick up on the clues, you can figure out who done it. And Agatha Christie doesn't do that. Nero Wolfe doesn't do that. But MacDonald consistently and Ellery Queen consistently do that.
Yes, MacDonald is extraordinary. The Chill is one of my favorite, and The Far Side of the Dollar and The Blue Hammer. Those I think are probably his finest works. But it was interesting you should mention him being the first writer of mystery novels to be reviewed on the front page of the New York Times. It was Eudora Welty who wrote that review. They had the same publisher, and they ended up being great friends. And there's a wonderful book out there of the correspondence that they exchanged. I think it's called There Are Always Letters. A wonderful, wonderful book that really gives you a lot of insight into the minds of working writers. I just thought I'd toss that out there for anyone amongst your viewers who might be interested. It's a great book.
I have a question for Phil, which is,
okay.
When did you get a clue that Ellery Queen was actually 2 people?
Oh, well, I started reading him in elementary school. So like 4th, 5th grade, and I knew that. I don't remember when I found out it was Frederick Daniel Manford Lee, but it's just something I've always sort of known. Well, I wanted to mention was the big difference between Ellery Queen and Ross MacDonald. Now I've been rereading the Ellery Queens, and they're still fun, but the writing is just god awful. Ross MacDonald's a real writer. He's a literary writer who happens to write mysteries, but it's really incredible. I still love the Ellery Queens because I like to solve puzzles, and the puzzles are amazing. His setups where people are killed in like just unbelievable. My favorite is the Chinese orange mystery where a body is found in a locked room supported by crossed African spears against the wall, and the guy's clothes are turned backwards. So he does stuff like that all the time, sets up these incredible, impossible murder scenes Ross MacDonald actually writes really serious fiction that happens to have mysteries and murders in them. And he went through psychoanalysis. And after that, every one of the murders in the present is because of some murder in the past, which was because of some murder 10 years before that. So there's sort of a pattern, it's sort of psychoanalysis, but they're unbelievably terrific reads.
They're
The sons
wonderfully
of the
written.
fathers are visited upon the children in Ross MacDonald's work, like especially in the later novels, again and again and again. And Phil, you were so right. He is a literary writer who just happens to be working in the mystery genre. Sometimes I'll wake my wife up to read a passage from from one of his works because it's just so bloody brilliant. I got to share it with someone.
I'm glad you all are talking about that. Strangely enough, I did a book launch for Donna Leon last night for her 30th Guido Brunetti mystery. And I mean, she's a wonderful stylist. I mean, they are, if there is such a thing, literary mysteries. Anyway, they're beautifully written. And I asked her, I already knew the answer, Phil. I'm paying attention to law school training, right? Never ask a question to which you do not know the answer. But I asked her, so who was her biggest influence? And it was Ross MacDonald, which, you wouldn't think would be necessarily the case for somebody writing about Venice, and although Donna's American. And her other influence was Ruth Rendell, who also was quite a literary writer and beautiful stylist. And we talked a bit about, because hilariously, one of her characters in her books is always reading Henry James, who's like among the most verbose writers ever. And Ross MacDonald was succinct, I mean, he didn't wax on, and Ruth Rendell was quite, succinct also. And I found that, that's fun that she has that juxtaposition. But Phil, the reason I mentioned Queen being two people was I wondered if the energy that went into constructing those impossible scenarios and all was better done with two of them, or whether one of them did the puzzle work and the other one actually did the writing. And I don't honestly know the answer to that.
Okay, so in the introduction, the Otto Penzler has reissued American Mystery Classics.
Right.
And I just finished reading the Egyptian Cross Mystery and the Siamese Twin. Anyway, he has an introduction, and it was Frederick Danny came up with a very complex plots, but he couldn't write worth a damn. And Manfred Lee thought that he was going to be one of the great American writers, but he couldn't think up ideas.
Right.
So Frederick Danny would send, and they never discussed how they actually did it, but you get the impression from the introduction that Otto wrote that Frederick Danny would write the really complicated plot, who the killer was, and this type of thing, and then leave it. Well, he also mentions that they had horrible fights. They really didn't they were cousins, and they really did not get along well. And it led to a lot of conflict, but again, they would never really talk about their writing process or who did what. So if you read the introduction to one of the American Mystery Classics, he goes into a lot of detail on what their working relationship was. Fortunately, I'm just on my own. I don't have to fight with myself. So
no, you don't. I'm going to throw one of my all-time favorite authors at you, because this author too was two people. They were both people who had served in the SOA special operation? Anyway, whatever the
OSS.
No, the British one, the sort of
SAS.
Thank you, the SAS and whatever. Man and a woman who were neighbors, and they wrote my very favorite spy story of all time, which is called A Toast to Tomorrow, written by Manning Coles. And they also wrote a book called Green Hazard, which I absolutely adore. And they're a bit dated, but the humor in them and the characters are astonishing. But they wrote in such a way, and I don't remember which one of them died first, but the other was absolutely unable to continue, because they had so fused as a voice and whatever it is that the book stopped with them. But if you're interested in that kind of thing, try to find a copy of A Toast to Tomorrow.
Weren't there rumors that Dick Francis his wife actually wrote the books, and
She was the writer and he was the authority. And when she died, you could tell that he floundered a bit. But I think that in all long collaborations, people fuse essentially, and it becomes difficult. I mean, I've talked to loads of writers who collaborate, Preston and Child, for example, and they develop a third voice that is not either one of them, but unique to the pair. And so, Dan, when you worked on screenplays, did you find in that collaborative environment that your voice became fused with other people?
I found my voice got silenced.
Oh, okay.
It's the way it works. That's, one of the great frustrations of being a screenwriter in Hollywood is that almost no one sees your work. Handful of producers, agents, studio heads, and that's because most screenplays that are commissioned don't end up making it to the screen. The vast majority. Some of the greatest screenplays ever written are just collecting dust on a shelf. But those that do, then they go to the hands of the director, the stars, who will paraphrase the dialogue that you've worked agonizingly hard to create. Well, let me tell you a story. When I was still teaching, I was a professor in the Midwest for a number of years before I went to Hollywood, and we had a graduate of DePauw University. His name was Jack Kennedy, but he went by Adam Kennedy. He came to give a talk, to do a reading of his latest book. And he'd done this thing called the Domino Principle, which became a movie, a rather successful film. And he brought his wife along. She, it turned out, was the daughter of Carmel Myers, the female star of the original silent Ben-Hur. Fascinating woman. She told me that her mother, even though she'd been forgotten for 50 years, still considered herself a queen and expected to be treated as one. But I'm getting away from the story that I wanted to share, which is so directly relevant to the plight of the screenwriter. He wrote a film, I think it was called The Dove, and he was the credited screenwriter. He was invited to the premiere, though like most screenwriters, he was not allowed on the set. He and his wife sat there as the lights went down, watched about the first 5 minutes, and she turned to him and said, "Jack, did you write any of this?" And he looks at her and says, "God, I hope not." So that's the plight of the screenwriter. Now, the only time there have been 2 times that I was collaborating with people who were on the same page as I was. Once was with that movie of the week that I mentioned, Death of a Cheerleader. I was working with a wonderful producer named Steve White. He put me together with that wonderful Billy Graham, and we saw everything the same way. They shot my script, and guess what? It was the most popular movie of the week for the 2 years preceding it. And like I said, it got remade. It became a cult film, and there are websites devoted to it in China, in India, in the most unlikely places. And they remade it 25 years later. The second time was my adaptation of Conrad's Lord Jim. I worked with David Foster, one of the great producers. His first film was McCabe and Mrs. Miller. His second film was The Getaway. I think he made 30 or 40 of them. And he was one of the only producers I ever worked with who wanted changes that actually improved my work. It's such a rarity. I will always cherish my relationship with this man and cherish what he told me on several occasions, that Lord Jim was one of the finest, it was one of the 2 finest screenplays he'd ever gotten his hands on. And now all of a sudden, I find there's another producer interested in it, 20 years after I wrote it, along with someone to watch over me. So we'll see. But there's such a difference between screenwriting and the novel. On the one hand, actually, I wanted to talk a little bit with Phil about his process of writing and my own experience in in writing the novel. So maybe we should do that and then kind of get back to this, if it's all right with you.
Yeah,
Sure.
one of the things I was noting is there's a big difference. My relationship with editors has always been fantastic. All the editors I've worked with haven't tried to make the book their own book. They basically come in and pointed out problems. And Keith Kale is my editor over at St. Martin's, and I am in the middle. As a matter of fact, today, after about 2 weeks, I finally finished going through the first round of editing for the book that's going to come out after A Matter of Life and Death, The Darkest Place. And I found with all the editors, David Gernert at Doubleday and Dan Conaway, all the people I've worked with, they've actually helped make the book better with their criticism. So it's never been a situation where an editor tries to rewrite my book. It's more of a situation where we have a collaboration. They take a look at what I've done, they point out problems, make intelligent suggestions, 90% of which I accept. And then whenever there's a disagreement, it's always a civilized discussion about whether whether it should remain the way I want it or the way they want it. But it's, I always encourage whenever I work with a new editor, the first thing I always tell them is, please don't tell me anything you like about the book, because if you like it, it's working. Tell me what you don't like, explain why you don't like it, and then make a suggestion on how to fix it. And like I say, I just love editors, and I really, really enjoy being beaten up by them. I always encourage them to, just go at me hammer and tongs. And I never had any writing courses, so I got a C+ in creative writing my sophomore year in college, and that's the only course I ever had. So I didn't know about character development, a lot of stuff. If I had an MFA, I would have known off the from the get-go. But since I didn't, I always really encouraged editors to beat me up because I wanted to learn how to write the books better. So it sounds like it's a really different process than what you go through when you write a screenplay and it gets grabbed away by the actors and the directors and everybody else, and they rip it up and put it back together the way they want it to.
Well, yes, that's the difference between Hollywood and the world of publishing. By the way, I would like to say that I got a B- in creative writing. It was my lowest grade. I was a straight A student except for creative writing.
I was never a straight A student.
Well, they gave me the B- out of the goodness of their hearts. They knew how serious I was about it, how badly I wanted to do it, and they didn't give me the C or the C- that I deserved. So it's one of the ironies of my life. But yeah, that's the kind of editor that I very much tried to be when I was working at Paramount as exec story editor. I tried to help the writer realize his or her own goals. I didn't try to make the story my own. And unfortunately, that's relatively rare in Hollywood. You get lucky sometimes, and as I did on 2 or 3 occasions. But for the most part, they try to take the story away from you and make it theirs. Just the way it happens. And when I was, go ahead.
Yeah. No, you go ahead and finish, and then I'm going to summon Patrick up like Caliban in The Tempest from his black hole to see if we have questions that they have been addressed.
I love Q&A.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about your actual working method before you send anything into the editors. I know that you're pretty heavily into outlining. I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because as I was when I was writing screenplays, though I had a very different experience with the book, and I thought it might be kind of fun to talk about that.
Yeah, I could, in 25 words or less, I can tell you exactly what I do with every single book. I start with an idea, which is tiny. A book is this big, an idea is this big. And I don't write. And I always advise people that are trying to write their first book, do not write. Get your idea and think. And sometimes I'll take years, literally years, to think before I actually start writing. I won't write a word till I get the ending. I have to know who the bad guy is and how they're going to get caught. And once I got the ending, then I spend 1 to 3 months writing an outline. And I literally talk my way through the entire book on the computer. So while I'm doing that, I'm not writing, I'm thinking. And I'm sitting there 6 hours a day just thinking about the plot and character development and all the other stuff you need to make a good book. And as you think and don't write, you get more ideas. You see what ideas you've got are not going to work. You realize you've got to add characters, etc. So once that outline's all done, I have the book written. It's just in shorthand. Then I take each paragraph, because it's written chronologically, and I make it into a chapter. And when I finish it, I've got a 400-page outline, because your first draft always sucks. It's never any good. It's not publishable, but I don't care. I've just gotten everything out of my head on paper. And then I spend months and months and months, maybe 2 to 4 to 6 months, rewriting for quality. So the whole process takes about 1.5 years. And then it goes to New York and the editor beats me up and then I rewrite and rewrite and rewrite again to make it even better. So that in a nutshell is the way I approach every single book I've written.
Well, that's very interesting, because that's close to what I did when I was writing screenplays. I had to know the ending before I even thought about the beginning. I have stories I can tell you about that where.
Well, should we get to the Q&A though?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
We best, because we're going to run out of time before people can't sit, I find, for much more than 60 minutes, and then they squirm. So there's Patrick. Isn't that wonderful? It's just magical.
Yeah.
Here he is back.
Everybody's being very, very quiet tonight for some reason. I keep asking for questions. One thing I wanted to ask real quick is, are either of you, I know Barbara is, familiar with Kenneth Millar's wife, Margaret Millar, who's also a wonderful writer?
Yes.
I think I've read some stuff by her, and Kenneth Millar's Ross McDonald, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I have read 1 or 2 of her books, but it's been a long time ago.
Yeah, she's pretty quirky. Beast in View, I think, won the Edgar Award.
That's
her voice never really appealed to me in the same way that Ross McDonald did. I don't know why, but I found her very hard going.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I just did.
I tried getting her. I read The Beast in View, and it's very good, but I just don't think it's at the level of Kenneth Millar, of Ross McDonald. He was an extraordinary stylist, and he was so brilliant at making you see where things were taking place and making you hear almost the sort of thing that Joseph Conrad was talking about in his famous preface to the N of the Narcissus. One of my friends has been banned from Amazon for having used the full title in this day of political correctness. But there's that. My task is to make you is to make you feel that it is above all to make you see. And I think Ross McDonald did that in a way that Margaret did not.
So I encourage people out there to ask questions, because I am the first published author I ever met. And I didn't meet me till I was in my 30s, and I would have loved to have a chance to ask a published writer, how do you do this stuff? So any questions about writing process or publishing that people have, I really enjoy answering questions.
Well, I have a few for you.
Okay.
with Robin, why did you decide on a female protagonist?
Okay, so it's interesting. There's a funny story behind that. The first two books I wrote had men as the main characters. And the third book I wrote was Gone But Not Forgotten, which was my first mega hit. It was a huge bestseller. And I started off, well, let me backtrack. After I wrote my first book, Heartstone, I was asked by the editor, and this was back in 1978, would I be interested in writing a series for pocketbooks with a woman prosecutor? And I just panicked. I said, I couldn't write a woman character. You know, I couldn't do it. How could I do that? So I was terrified of women. And when I started writing Gone But Not Forgotten, it's about this hideous serial killer. And there's an initial scene where the lawyer meets with Martin Darius in a deserted, it's not deserted, but it's in a high-rise office building, but it's like late at night when the only people around are the cleaning crews. It's a very scary scene. And I've represented serial killers. So as a male, if I was in with a male serial killer who killed women, you're always, when you have a contact visit with someone who's killed somebody, your radar goes up a little bit. But if you know you're not their type, you know, you're not as nervous as you might be. So I thought to myself, well, had planned on having a male lawyer as the main character. And I said, boy, if I had a woman character, the tension level would be through the roof. Because here you have this woman meeting with a guy who's hideously murders women, isolated at night on a 10th floor of a vacant, not vacant, but office building. So I realized I had to do a sex change operation on my main character and make her a woman, but I was still terrified. And I thought, how am I going to do this? How am I going to make a woman character? And I was married to my first wife, Doreen, at the time, and who was an attorney. And I thought, well, who's the toughest guy I know? And I said, that's my wife, Doreen. So I said, well, I'll just imagine Doreen in every scene where Bessie Tannenbaum, the lawyer, is involved. And using that crutch, I got over my fear of women. And I would say most of my books have a lead character. This is A Matter of Life and Death is my 25th. And I would say the majority have very strong female characters. Now, Robin has a very unusual background because Robin worked her way through Yale Law School, paying her tuition by fighting in mixed martial arts pay-per-view TV bouts. So she's a nationally ranked MMA fighter. And I did that because in a lot of the books, the strong female character gets in a very dangerous situation. And in real life, if a woman and a man were to fight, the guy's usually going to come out on top for many reasons. But I thought, well, how could I make the scenes, if Robin has to have a fight or get in conflict with a male, how can I make them realistic and have her win? And I said, of course, I'll make her a professional fighter. So as a professional fighter, if she wins a fight with a man, it's nobody's going to say, oh, that could never happen. And it definitely could happen. So that was sort of my idea for getting a woman MMA fighter who is also a brilliant attorney, and Yale's one of the toughest law schools to get into. So that was the genesis of making Robin the main character.
Is there a touch of Clarice Starling in her anywhere?
No, she's a really she doesn't have a lot of psychological problems. She's really grounded. She grew up in the Midwest. Her three older brothers were star wrestlers, and she wanted to join the wrestling team. And the parents protested because they didn't want their boys having to wrestle with a girl. And her father hired a lawyer and sued the school board. And when she won, when the lawyer won the case, she decided she was going to be a lawyer when she grew up. So she's from a farm family and real steady and brilliant, dedicated attorney. Nothing like Clarice, because she doesn't have any of these psychological problems that Clarice had.
Can you talk a little bit about your book, Worthy Brown's Daughter?
Yes, and that is the best thing I've ever done. With the exception of Worthy Brown, every one of my books has been a contemporary legal thriller, set in the present. I had a 12-year gap between my second book, The Last Innocent Man, and my third, because I was concentrating on my law practice. And sometime during that 12-year period, either in the Oregon Historical Society Journal or the Oregon Bar Journal, I learned about Holmes V Ford, an 1853 case from the Oregon Territorial Supreme Court. And that is a case that held that you could not have slaves in Oregon. And I just became, it's a very sad case because what happened was Colonel Nathaniel Ford was a very wealthy landowner and slave owner in Missouri in the 1840s. The Missouri economy went belly up, and so he did what a lot of people do. He had to sell his land, sold most of his slaves. But in those days, if you were a failure in one place, you just moved someplace else. And Oregon gave us a square mile of land free if you would farm it, and two miles if you're square miles if you were married. So he told the Holmes family, who were his slaves, come with me, the Oregon Territory, and help me establish my farm, and I'll free you. If you don't, I'll sell you. So they came with him, helped him with the farm, and he reneged. Now, they had 5 children. And what he did was he said, I'll let you, Robin and Polly Holmes, the parents, I'll let you go. But I fed and clothed your children when they were young, and they were useless because they were too little. But now they're older. They have to earn back what I put into them. It was against the law to educate a slave in Missouri. So the Holmeses were illiterate, and they realized they had to go to court to get their children back. But they didn't have the skills to do that, even though they were fairly bright, but they were totally uneducated. So for some reason that's lost to history, Reuben Boyce, who became an Oregon Supreme Court justice, represented him in court, sued to get the kids back, but one of the children died while in Holmes' custody. And they did eventually get the children. And what struck me as a writer was, how would I feel? I have 2 children. If somebody kidnapped my children, everyone knew who did it and where they were, but I couldn't get them back because of my color of my skin. And I thought this would make an incredible novel. And it took me 30 years to write it. I had to do, I didn't know, I never took any history courses when I was in college. I had to research to find out what a lawyer was like in the 1800s. I said in 1860 when Abraham Lincoln was running for presidency, because slavery was the major issue during that time. And I had to do all this research to find out what it was like, because if you're writing a novel, a historical novel, you've got to make it 3-dimensional. I didn't know, did people brush their teeth back then? Did they have toothpaste? How did you get water for if you want to get a drink? So it took me about 30 years to write it. And when it got published, I think it was 2014, I think it's the best thing I've ever done. And it's a heavily fictionalized version of that Holmes versus Ford case.
How did you get
Patrick, I'm going to have to excuse myself because I have a family obligation at 7, and I just realized that we've gotten to 7. So I'm going to leave Patrick to clean this up with you. Gentlemen, it's really been a pleasure. Dan, really enjoyed meeting you. Again, I'm going to hold up your book, Someone to Watch Over Me. And Phil, we will get your book, which I now know is not called Life and Death. Right. Anyway, so thank you all very much for this evening, and I will hope to see you in person next time. Bye.
The books are all autographed, by the way. I autographed them all and shipped them back to you. So
Excellent.
They're all autographed first editions. So.
Thank you, Phil. Really appreciate it. Good night.
Okay.
Right. Now the fun really starts, guys. All right. No, I'm just kidding. So was it a challenge to get, if you're writing in a historical, obviously in a historical period, you want to get people speaking, and was the dialogue a challenge for you? Did you read, contemporary accounts to get some of that?
Yeah, what I did was I read, fortunately, the Oregon Historical Society has a wonderful library, and it was only a couple of blocks from my law office. So if I had an easy day, no clients or court appearances, this is like in the 1980s, so I would bring a steno pad and a pen, no computers, no stuff. And I go up there and I read journals written by people who went on the Oregon Trail. Fortunately, I found an incredible book, The Memoir of Stephen J. Field. Stephen J. Field is one of the most astonishing people in American history, and no one knows who he is. He is the very first U.S. Supreme Court justice from the West. He was the longest serving Supreme Court justice up until William O. Douglas, and he is the only Supreme Court justice to ever be arrested for murder while he was sitting on the bench. And if you ever saw the old Maverick TV show, Stephen J. Field's life was like that. Shootouts, death threats from judges. I mean, his life was just almost like a movie or a made-up story. So he did describe his law office in detail and what it was like to be a lawyer it was the 1850s. But I just sort of used poetic license and moved stuff around. But the dialogue, I made a decision. Worthy Brown he's not an African American. He's an African who was a slave who was brought over. And initially, I was tempted to do dialect, and I said, "No, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to have him talk. He's a bright guy. I'm just going to have him talk." And actually, I was asked about that in one of the readings by an African American who wanted to know why I didn't do the dialect. And I said, no, I just didn't feel it was necessary. I thought, he's a bright guy. He expresses himself well, and I'll just, I'm not going to do that. So I don't have swear words in there, and that's a big thing, because I don't think there was as much swearing going on at that time. But I just wrote a book, and it was it's been very well received. So no one's ever criticized me because they didn't think I did the dialogue correctly.
Right, sure. I would just imagine that would be a challenge, possibly.
I didn't let it be. Let me just put it that way. I didn't obsess about how am I going to do this. I just decided to write the book and have the people talk. And again, like I say, no one has ever commented either in a review or in a reading or anything about that. Right.
Now, I have a question, which is just about, you've had numerous things adapted for the big screen and for television. Mm-hmm. How many of your books have been adapted at this point?
Okay, two of the books, The Last Innocent Man, which Dan wrote the great screenplay for, and Gone But Not Forgotten was a mini series with Brooke Shields. I've had a number of the other ones, I don't have an exact count, that have been optioned. And the first thing that happens when there's an option is the person who gets the option hires a screenwriter. Right. Usually they have somebody that they're friendly with or that they've used before. So I've read a number of adaptations, and some have been really good, some have been really bad, but I don't have really any ego involvement in my stuff. It's fun to write it, and once I'm done, I'm done with it. So I sort of get a kick out of seeing what someone else does with my, with my what I wrote. So the different take. Now I will say that I've been extremely lucky, because Gone But Not Forgotten and The Last Innocent Man, the screenplays were really, really good. And so I was lucky in that, obviously I would rather have a good screenplay than an awful screenplay, because if people like the movie, they may go out and buy the book. But I've really lucked out on having two excellent ones. And what's interesting about The Last Innocent Man is it's very complex. It's got subplots. It's got a 125-page flashback, which is really very difficult to adapt for the movies. It's got a lot of other stuff. And what happened was I had a number of screenplays written that were for 2 hour. Movies are 2 hours, so you have to have a 120-page script, 1 page for every minute of shooting time. And they couldn't do it. They just could not do the book in 120 pages. The miniseries is 4 hours. And so they were able to do the book exactly the way the book was supposed to be. And it turned out really, really well. So I had a couple of nits to pick, but I would say I was 95% happy and 100% happy with Dan's treatment of Last Innocent Man.
Now, a more general question, and then we'll wrap things up here. Did you want to become a lawyer first or a writer first?
Oh, I never ever wanted to be a writer. When I was in the 7th grade, because of all the Perry Mason books I'd read, I decided I was going to be a criminal defense lawyer who did murder cases when I grew up. And that was the only thing I wanted to do. And like I said, I got lucky and I did exactly what I wanted to do for 25 years. I've been a voracious reader. I still read 2 to 3 books a week. And I started doing that in elementary school. I was reading like Jules Verne in 2nd grade. And I just love to read. It's like my addiction. And I was in awe of writers. So it never even occurred to me that I could write a book. I mean, that seemed like impossible. So the way I got published was very weird. I had a free time my last semester in law school and wrote a really bad novel because I couldn't figure out how anyone could write a novel. How could you fill up 400 pages of words? Seemed impossible. So that was my little project, and I wrote a bad 180-page book about based on my Peace Corps experiences in Africa. And the book was bad, but I liked the writing, so it was a hobby. And then I got a short story published in my 30s, and that gave me some self-confidence. So then I decided to write a novel based on this incredible Oregon murder case, the Peyton Allen murders, that I learned about when I was clerking at the Court of Appeals. Wrote 5 chapters without knowing what the hell I was doing, because like I said, I've never had any writing classes. I didn't know, about character development, all sorts of stuff. I get a call from Marty Bauer. Marty was a room next to me in my first year in law school. And then we had a couple of classes together a second year, and then I lost track of him. And he called me up. He said, Phil, my wife and I want to come out from New York to Oregon on vacation. Can we get together? And yeah, stay at the house. I'll take some time off from work and I'll take you up to Mount Hood and show you the sights. So when we were coming back from the airport, or driving from the airport back to the house, I said, what have you been doing? And it turned out he was one of 3 lawyers for the largest literary agency in the world. And I said, Marty, I'm writing a book. And he said, oh no, tried to get out of the car. And so no, actually, he was really nice. And I explained I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Could he show the 5 chapters to someone at the literary agency and have him say, this is brilliant, keep going, or it's really awful, stop. And without asking me, he sold the book. So that's how I got published. So, people say, how do you get published? I say, well, you go to law school, you get really friendly with somebody who's in. So that's how I became a writer. It was nothing I ever planned.
When were you able to give up your day job? That's one of the questions I have here. Are you still practicing law in any capacity?
No, I stopped. What happened was when Gone But Not Forgotten came out, I've been practicing for 25 years at that time. And it became a huge, it was a massive bestseller.
Right.
And at that point, I really enjoyed writing as a hobby, not as a full-time job.
This is 93 or 94, is that
93.
Right? Yeah.
And I'm very responsible. I had a family, I had a mortgage, so I decided that I had about 2 years worth of cases. And I decided I wouldn't take any more cases for 2 years. And I would write. And I didn't know if I was I could be a one-hit wonder, just one book and then you never do it again. I also didn't know if I liked being a full-time writer. I'd just done it as a goof, on weekends and stuff. After 2 years, I had 5 New York Times bestsellers. So I knew I could pay the mortgage and feed the family. And I enjoyed it. I loved the writing. And, I always sort of joke as a lawyer, when I was in court and I lied and made stuff up, they threatened to put me in jail and disbar me. And here I was lying and making stuff up, and people were telling me how great I am. So it was not as stressful as defending someone whose life could be taken away from them. The worst that can happen to me is I get a bad review, and I can live with that. And I decided I really enjoyed it. And after you've done something for 25 years, switching to another job is sort of fun. So I'd done everything basically you do as a lawyer. I'd argued in the U.S. Supreme Court. I made law, I made law in the state of Oregon, pioneered the battered women syndrome in murder cases, and on and on. So I'd really done everything you could do. And I thought, well, okay, this would be nice. I'll try a different job. So 1996 is when I stopped practicing and became a full-time writer, and I've been writing full-time since.
Wow, that's fantastic. Dan, sorry to leave you out there for a few minutes. Do you have, I just had a question come in. Are you planning more in your Jack Shannon? Will there be another book?
Yes, there'll definitely be another book. I'm fascinated by that post-war period in Hollywood. At the beginning of it, the studios were at their maximum strength. Their power was unlimited, but there were already cracks in the foundation. The Paramount consent decrees were coming down. They were losing their distribution system. The stars were breaking their contracts, going out on their own. It was the end of the star system. There was the challenge of television. So it's a period of enormous change. And there's always a lot of drama involved in that. At any rate, I plan at least 2 more books. And the next one, I think, Jack's going to end up blackballed by all of the studios. So he's going to work on Poverty Row, which is where all of the B, C, and D movies were made. And he's going to be a jack of all trades. He'll be a stunt man. He'll be a creature in monster pictures. That's where he's been relegated. And I think it should be a lot of fun. I'm having fun with it already.
So you'll be getting into the HUAC era?
Yes, that's the other thing, the blacklist period.
Yeah.
That period from right after the war into the early 50s is just fascinating. I'd always wondered what it would be like to work in the studio system. And then that led me to this period where it's breaking down, it's coming to pieces, but it's still strong. It just, to me, that's really exciting and its dramatic possibilities.
And that's the real heyday for the film noir that came out.
Absolutely. And that's my favorite of all. One of the things I've been thrilled by is that most of those who have read the book and commented on it have compared it to a lot of the greats of that classic noir period. And that's what I was after. So I'm really pleased about that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You get all, this whole generation of soldiers coming home, who their worldview was forever changed. And, there's a fallen world. And
Absolutely.
A lot of that
you may be familiar with this book, Five Came Back. It's about 5 motion picture directors who volunteered to fight, and they made movies, they made documentaries out there in amongst it all. The one that I found most interesting was George Stevens, who'd been the consummate director of film comedy. I mean, he made some of the great comedies of all time. And he went through D-Day, the Battle of the Bulge, and the freeing of the death camps. And he came back a changed man. He was never the same. He made very serious films after that. He was one of my inspirations for my character who's been through the same thing. The D-Day, the Battle of the Bulge, the freeing of the death camps. And the other was J.D. Salinger. He went through exactly the same thing, and it fundamentally changed him forever. So that's part of what's going on in the book. My guy comes back, he's a burnout case. He's seen too much. He doesn't care. He can't care anymore. And then his involvement with Savannah Stevens brings him back to the point where he really does care. And it's that period of time that enabled me to do that character.
Yeah, I mean, Lee Marvin is a good example of somebody who had the same horrible PTSD, from what I understand, and Robert Ryan, a number of actors of that generation.
Yes.
Well, it
Yes.
sounds like it's going to be right up my alley. I love this kind of thing. And
Well, I look forward to you reading it.
yeah, my grandfather was actually a LAPD cop in the 40s and 50s, and he died really young in a somewhat of a James Elroy manner. But my mother has these wonderful memories because he was in charge of, at one point, he was in Hollywood Station during that period, and his detail, covered the security for a lot of these motion picture premieres. And so my mom, as a little girl, has wonderful memories of going to some of these premieres, in the late 40s, early 50s. Pretty neat time.
Yes, it is. As a matter of fact, there's a premiere kind of in the background of one of the major sequences in the book. So, yeah, I love that period of time. I lived in Pomona, and it was about 30 miles away from Hollywood. And actually, I'd drive in once a week, and I trained as an actor as a very, very young man, and I went for my lessons there in Hollywood. Watched the Capitol building rise, this round foundation, and what is that? Week by week, it got higher. But the thing I loved the most was going in and seeing all those searchlights in the sky, everything coming from the Chinese theater. I mean, it was a really exciting time in Hollywood.
And it's, you go there still, and the ghosts of the past are everywhere,
Oh, yeah.
They
Oh,
can't
yeah.
come up. And LA has that interesting, bizarre, kind of occult underbelly to it, that is
Well,
always.
that's exactly what I'm writing about. It's specifically Hollywood, which is right there in the middle of Los Angeles, but it's the glamour, the searchlights sweeping the sky, the stars showing up in the limos at the Chinese theater, the neon lights, all of the celebrities. And then you look at the despair underlying it all.
Yeah.
That's really the driving force behind the whole book.
We could nerd out about this forever. I read there was a homicide detective's photo diary, wonderful book, and he was active in the 1930s, so a little bit before this. But he talks a lot about the boom and bust cycle in LA, and how in the 30s, there's just widespread suicide in Los Angeles because, this whole generation had moved out there thinking they were going to achieve the great, they were going to be the next movie star, and it didn't happen, and a very noir reality to it all.
Well, do you know about the actress who jumped off the Hollywood sign and committed suicide?
No, I didn't.
Yes. To me, that story is sort of the quintessential Hollywood story. Years ago, I wrote something for USA Cable about an acting coach. And so I spent a lot of time hanging out with the top acting coaches in Hollywood. And one of them, after we got to know each other fairly well, said to me, Dan, I'll never be unemployed. You know why? Because every month, 6,000 young people come to Hollywood hoping to become stars. And that really says it, or hoping to become directors, or hoping to become writers. There's so much desire and so little fulfillment. And it results in a lot of despair, like that poor young actress jumping off. I think she jumped off the H.
Wow. That bus station at Hollywood and Vine. Yeah. Well, anyway, thanks everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. Sorry to go a little bit long. It's been really fun talking to you both tonight. And
let me just hold up the book. This, since you don't have the book, this is the cover. It's a cool cover.
Matter of life. Put it back a little bit.
Got it?
There you go. That's it. And yeah, so we're expecting our signed copies any moment. And I put a little link in just the comments field, so I'm sure we'll be sold out quickly. And Dan, your book is called Someone to Watch Over Me, correct?
Yes.
I can't wait to get a copy and read it.
Well,
Really
I can't
good.
wait to have you do it.
Yeah.
Really good.
All right, gentlemen. Well, thanks and have a wonderful evening. And thanks everybody for tuning in on Facebook tonight. Always a pleasure. And we will talk to you soon.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.